you, I think, were able to join us for that walk, which was really fruitful. So want to thank folks for making the suggestion, and then those who were able to attend. Thank you so much for doing that. I thought in this session, we could highlight some of the things that we learned on that site walk, and that will also be folded into the materials for the next public meeting. Any questions on the site walk or other comments people have on that one?
Well, I think, we talked about a lot of individual things, both from the fishermen folks that were there as well as the boat club people. So maybe if we go through some of your thoughts in terms of the synthesis of it and what you're sort of planning to present, we can see whether or not there might be something missing, based on what we're scratching our head.
Yeah, sure. Yep, I'm happy to do that. So I'll flip to that in a second, Bill. The other, thing that came up in the task force meeting the last time we all got together was just making sure that we baselined the scope of work that this project is fulfilling. And, we had discussed the extent of work and the scope of work and the final deliverable. But we wanted to make sure that that clarification went not just to task force members, but also was making its way out to the general public. So Orion was great about helping to facilitate a frequently asked questions portion on the project webpage on the town website. And so that is up and live and has been now for a number of weeks since that last meeting. And so that is a spot where you can direct folks if they want clarification on, the scope of this work and how this work relates to the, $2 million in funding and that sort of thing. So just want to make sure that everyone's aware of that resource. And I think it would be really important for us to just make those points of clarification also at the beginning of the next public meeting to make sure that everyone is on the same page there. So with that, I guess we can move into the next items and also sort of highlight what we took away from that site walk. So if I flip to the site walk slide, what we did after doing that site walk with everyone is start to basically create an exhibit that captures a lot of the points that were raised. And as Bill noted, this is an opportunity also for folks here to point out, anything that's missing, and we can fine tune it. But it was a great opportunity to spend some time walking the site again and see it through the lens of the folks who attended. So there were a number of representatives from both the Working Waterfront and the Boat Club, because we thought the Boat Club would be a little bit less complicated. We started there. So when we met at the Boat Club, what we were hearing from a number of the members who were there is that, it's really a cultural institution in Rockport, and there's a lot of pride and nostalgia for this structure. But the structure is located in a spot where it's facing adverse challenges from flooding currently, and members are aware, of damage that's happened in the past from storm activity. And I'm sure you all saw that when we shared the photos and video from prior storm events. So what we were sort of hearing from Boat Club members and folks is that, they recognize that there might be a need to have a resilience strategy, but the hope is that that's done in a way that's sensitive to that structure and isn't changing it more than is required to sort of allow that functionality to continue into the future. And so, from their standpoint, that was sort of the request that we had heard. And while we were out there, they had talked about, just how things function and operate on their site. So, how there's access out to the float and how that's very important, and they wouldn't want that to change. And, they've got their kayak storage and grilling area and just various elements there. So that was really what we were hearing from folks in the boat club. I'm not sure if there's anybody who wants to elaborate or point out anything else on that before we move on to working waterfront piece of things.
Real quick, Blake, I think Nancy.
Blake, it's Nancy. I just to point out again that the mission of the boat club is to provide youth sailing programs for the area, and those floats are where that program takes place.
Yeah, understood. And so Nancy, we're correct, right? And having the understanding that that's, absolutely critical. And the floats need to stay where they are to facilitate,
Well, not so much that, not so much that they need to stay where they are, but my point was that the boat club facilitates that program, and I don't know if that program could happen off of any other of the docks that are out there. So, but we do have some floats out in the harbor where we do keep the fleet. So they do motor off of our float out to the harbor floats to get the fleet, but and it's the members that also provide the financial means for that program to happen as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that, is just really inspirational and awesome, that you all are making that available as you have, it seems, for many years. So definitely the goal there is to enable that to function well into the future.
Real quick, did you get any feedback from Mark or Angela or anyone else at the meeting that would?
No, I think I asked Mark, who was sharing about the bulkhead there, and he felt like he had shared what he wanted to share.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was fine. I think they got their message out there and they felt comfortable with what they were hearing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. All right.
Ryan, is it possible to make that full screen?
Yeah, I can see back here.
Let me see what I can do on my end.
I can make it a bit larger. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah.
That's better.
Oh, perfect.
Okay, great. So then after sort of engaging with boat club folks, we continued on and sort of just sequentially made our way around the harbor. And so I'll just start on this side. So there's a pump station that's lower lying. And so there's a need to protect or relocate that facility to ensure, that it's operable into the future. There was a suggestion when we were looking at kind of the interface between this area and Rockport Marine that currently, as we heard, there's a little bit of a challenge getting, trailers and things into Rockport Marine just at this corner because those of you who are familiar may know there's, an existing tree out there. The radius is a little bit tight and the tree is not doing well. It's in poor condition. And also that's a spot where if you look at the grade of the road, what we were hearing is that, there's a high point that is challenged for clearance for some of those trailers. So that was just pointed out in terms of, thinking about this zone in general, since this is prone to flooding, it's lower lying, and it's, serves an important function for the working waterfront. There was just mention made of those current challenges. So, if this zone did say come up in grade, then that might actually help with not only flooding in this location, but potentially reduce that concern for access into Rockport Marine's yard on that corner. And I'll show you, photos of these spots also. In this zone, there was also a need to think about the utilities that are out there. And there's both, as we understand it, public and private utilities. But at the end of the day, they're in harm's way at the moment. And so something needs to be done there. Um, there was a request to think about general site lighting for this zone, just given the hours and how early, the working waterfront starts with activity, that would be one spot where, having lighting would be beneficial. There's already, as I understand it, security cameras and things, but just lighting, enhanced lighting there would be helpful. There's a segment of the seawall where there are already piles that provide additional rigidity and support in the foreground of those. And then there's an area here where the piles do not exist. And so there was mention made that strengthening the seawall through locating additional piles would also be recommended. The dark gray that you see on this zone here is already sort of a thickened concrete zone. And people were saying that, gosh, it might be helpful if there was a paved apron around the edge of this area, because what tends to happen is that water is able to penetrate through, the blocks in the seawall, and there's enough pressure that it creates these sort of geysers that displace soil, and where there's already sort of a thickened concrete paving area, then that hasn't been an issue. And so when we were walking the site, the mention was made, could there be some sort of 6-foot wide, concrete paved zone that would need to be the same level in elevation as the surrounding area, so you can still drive on it or drive over it and have the access that you need right to the water's edge. But that would help stabilize that zone. And Todd Coffin had also said, it would be recommended to think about just looking closely at the seawall itself from a structural standpoint, and that there are, engineering methods that could be employed to, if there's, specific weak points that are identified as they're looking at that, that could be shored up as needed. There was mention made of the lift in this location, which I think everyone agreed isn't able to serve any useful purpose in its current spot. And so the thought was, if that could, move down closer to where the boat club is located, then might be a better location for that. There was mention made about potentially dredging the channel where there's a challenge with clearance. That's, I think, most of the items on this side of the working waterfront that are on these notes. Are there other things that folks wanted to highlight in that spot?
Couple questions. The first one, Blake, is the fishermen mentioned that getting another 10 feet of space toward the boat club would be beneficial to them as far as turning trucks around and such. I don't know if you've heard that or not.
I did.
I don't know what sits in people's minds as to,
Yeah, I mean, my only concern is that the float out there when we have members coming up to use that with their sailboats and whatnot, it's very tight. I don't know if this is actually to scale, but when you have other boats across the harbor and you have people launching, if you move our float down further towards the river, it's gonna really make things pretty congested in there. That's
You're
my.
talking about truck.
yeah, I'm not sure that it's actually in the channel as much as they just want a little more room to bring trucks in and out of the
You
main
mean
lobster area.
You mean the parking lot area, not the water side. That's you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I think those are two separate things, but I know what you're talking about, but I was gonna mention that. I didn't hear that part.
Yeah, they just, essentially where that tank currently sits.
Oh, right, in that
Their
area
ASG.
is very congested.
Yeah, they just wanna shove
Two
that,
box trucks.
they wanna
you
shove
get-
that ASG 10 feet further.
Towards
To
the,
where the kayaks are.
Yeah, in effect. Now, this was just a discussion.
It's just a thrown out.
This wasn't a, we're gonna do it.
Right.
It's, we're putting it out there as they'd love to have a little more room, so it's not so congested right in that turnaround area. And 10 feet's not a lot, it'd probably be halfway to the boat club. Maybe a third, I don't know, we have to look at
Not
it.
even with that fence.
But that's still on the list, I think, as far as potential.
And they were talking about floats down the creek where
Where the horse
river-
is now.
I can't, yeah, where the voice is now. They wanted something about, floats there too.
So a couple of narrow floats along the inside, there have been floats bigger than the narrow ones
Yeah.
we're suggesting. There, that didn't impede the boat club, not all the way down to that sort of the mouth of the river, but, up. Right, pretty much where the hoist is now, and maybe, a couple sections of.
I think
small
Jamie Dodge
floats.
used to keep his boat.
Yeah, there used to be
Yeah.
4 or 5.
Yeah, there'd be a
But
bunch of.
is that for dinghies or just tie-ups while you're?
They could come, I mean, that to be determined,
Okay.
but for commercial use for the fishermen. to,
Especially when everyone's
leave their boat
loading
in,
and
loading
unloading.
gear. and-
That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and they could, they could unload,
Temporary tie-up.
they could
That's where
unload
the
off.
hoist is.
More or less where it is.
Yeah.
You're talking about a float there?
Yeah,
Like a,
No.
a little more narrow than the ones that were there
yeah,
before.
Patrick said something
But
about 6
they're
feet
not.
something.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing to be careful of is that there's room to get through there
Right.
between the town float.
Yeah,
If there's a boat on the
Launch
float
it.
there.
Yeah.
Is there room to get another boat in the channel?
historically, they've done it at height, when like,
Yeah.
Danny Dodge would leave his boat on there and the dinghy would be hanging
Right.
and the certain, it definitely is tight.
depends on the current and the time and all that.
Yeah,
Right
well, they
now,
would be,
there's
and
not a
his
float
boat
there,
was
is
also,
there?
10 feet wide.
Yeah.
Right.
So we would
Like
look
a
at.
6
What
feet.
kind of width, 6 feet?
6 feet, that's
Yeah.
what I got, Patrick is 6 feet.
Yeah,
But the question, what I took from the discussion was that they weren't looking to tie off dinghies or leave.
leave
boats
anything,
there.
no, just be used to
unload.
here,
Loading,
yeah.
unloading, and then you're gone.
Yeah.
So the structure's still there, the 6 feet, but it's not
it's not a permanent, it's not a,
In theory,
yeah, I mean, there'll be,
Right. So if someone breaks down, at least it gives you a place to put your boat while everyone else is coming. I mean, right now, they're crazy getting all the traps in. I mean, it's crazy.
Right, so it was a.
In terms of scale, do you think, I mean, if it's just for loading, unloading and that sort of thing, like, would it be a similar length, to this float?
It would probably be about a 30-foot float, I would say.
yeah,
30?
That's what, yeah.
By
similar
6
in length
feet.
to the
Mhm.
floats that are now, the newest dinghy floats now that are in front of my office are about that dimension.
Mhm.
30 by 6.
30 by 6.
Yeah, they're 15-foot section, or 20-foot section, so it's 40 feet, so 20 by 6.
So what kind of vertical access to those floats?
You could use a ladder, you wouldn't need a ramp,
That's what I'm thinking, but
Yeah.
that's what I'm asking.
yeah.
Okay.
Oh, but then you need a hoist too.
Would that float then make that hoist location?
That's what that other hoist is.
We're buying,
But you're just
The height,
moving it.
Whatever was working, the high tide,
Yeah.
the time, like, yeah.
It wouldn't make the present hoist
Yeah.
location viable.
still one way to lose the hoist.
why don't we just switch places?
What, boat club?
Yeah.
Well, you get strung out, probably. That's one.
I'm just saying, you guys want more space, it seems you want more down the river.
Oh, you want it on the corner?
Yeah,
Yeah, oh, okay, well, I was thinking you were doing that.
I'm just
We're
being
thinking out of the
creative,
box, I like
being
it.
creative here.
Something I bounced off of Brad, and I wish he was here tonight. In looking at more acreage, call it, for the fishermen. I said, would it be useful to build off of the fisherman's corner there? A wharf similar to what Heron is docked on.
Yeah.
Which is not on this map, but, it's a piece of parking lot built on pilings, and if that was to happen in the orientation of the current fisherman's float, and this would be something, Blake, that I would think Todd would consider,
Yeah,
it would serve to block swells from upriver. and give the fishermen a lee
A
side,
little break.
you know, so that would be another option to make some more land there without pushing the boat club.
Okay,
Yeah.
Like they do in redevelopment.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
I bounced off of Brad, but I'd be curious to hear what other
Yeah.
fishermen have to.
Tell, ask Patrick.
Yeah.
I'm sure that.
Yeah, Patrick would be willing to.
Would to what Nancy was just suggesting. And I don't know if there's anything to it, but I'll put it out there anyway, if we gave the boat club the corner. And then push the fishermen on the other side. I'm thinking out loud,
Yeah, I don't know if they would appreciate that or not.
I mean, I don't know that
I'm just thinking, the boat club's gonna stay there, so you're saying the fishermen will have the space in front of the boat club?
no, what I'm saying is we put the. Boat club. Where the fishermen are, where mainly lobster pulls in now.
Yeah.
Move that to the corner and then the fishermen can have from the other side of that all the way down.
My concern there would be the river and the
The
congestion
turnaround.
of the river.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a question, not a statement.
yeah, right, but I like Sam's idea about building out,
Mhm.
there. Cause you're fortifying it, making a lee side a little bit, and also getting more real estate, cause right now we're working with what real estate we have, which is limited.
And I'm thinking about the fishermen who do float their crates off the fisherman's, dock as it is now. If it's up more the river, they're really impacted by the fresh water coming in, and you're gonna lose, that's what happens to Camden Harbor when it rains. That you wouldn't believe the loss of lobsters, the things that are floating, so they're gonna die, so they don't wanna be up close to the river, because all that fresh water is gonna impact them, so
Oh,
that's a no-go.
okay. I'll be-
if you were gonna build out, are you talking about building out like here, or is it further down on this side?
The latter.
The second one.
Second one.
Okay, this guy.
One. And do,
Yeah.
I mean, you could get creative and do,
Like an
recreational
L.
float on one side.
Yeah.
So what kind of orientation are you thinking, Sam?
You know, if the bait truck, where the bait truck parks currently, if they were to sort of keep going towards the, towards the other side.
So in other words, like the way he's drawing it, kind of.
Yeah,
Straight,
no.
maybe pointed straight to
Yeah,
him.
straight up the way the ramp is oriented now.
Okay,
So build that area out.
Yeah. You know,
you could drive a truck on it?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's similar to our travel
Yeah.
here, say.
yeah.
Okay.
and you've got room to get around it once you get out of the channel, so no one's gonna whack it.
It is the most exposed, predominantly the most exposed
Yeah.
location, so when you might think about building it a little higher, but that wouldn't be hard to do, I don't think. I'm not the engineer.
Well, let's put it out there then as a discussion.
And
Okay.
if we could go back to the corner, you had it right about removing that tree. The other piece we talked about was, keeping the base of the riprap where it is, but filling in the top again, so that turn is less tight. It's a pretty, yeah. Yep.
That's the one.
Good.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that that makes sense, and then we can float this idea with Todd about potentially having more access on this point that may have a co-benefit of reducing energy at the mouth of the river, and see how that goes. I mean, from the boat club's perspective, I guess that would then, it looks like, sort of be somewhat in the foreground a little bit, but do you see any issue with that, Nancy, or you think that would be fine, especially if the boat club is getting elevated and maybe your views out are improved?
I mean, I'm sure it would be, a way to work around whatever. It seems, it is still tight in there. It is
When you get that way.
I mean,
it's just
Doug,
more
are you
water.
bringing your boat up to the dock? To the Rockport Boat Club dock? Do you bring your
Yeah,
boat up
yeah,
there?
42 feet, and it's, I'm skilled at the wheel,
Okay.
but it's tight, yeah.
Yeah.
You gotta,
Because we do bring our, we have a 20-foot center console and it's small enough, but it can be tricky some days. And
Yeah,
it's just
sure.
knowing, what you need to be doing, which,
Especially if there's a boat on the end of our dock that comes, a
Yeah.
pretty beamy boat on the end.
Yes.
Sea dock.
which it's not really, if you drew in a boat up at that dock, you could kind of see how tight it can be. Especially when they're launching boats.
Oh, yeah, that's a
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah, and they said, somebody had said that, you know, that rock pile in the middle of the river doesn't really bother people. But, you know, talking about some of this stuff, moving a float further up the river and tightening things up. I just can't believe it wouldn't help the situation if that rock pile wasn't there, so you could spin around further up the river if you needed to.
It's past the launch ramp. I mean, if you're up that far,
Yeah,
Right.
you're.
There's
well,
no spinning, yeah.
Yeah.
okay.
So was that pretty much decided that didn't need to come out? Was that kind of a consensus?
It was.
Okay.
Yeah. Not for anything we've ever launched.
Let's, anything else with them? So we got,
Yeah.
the new wharf, if you will, as being one issue. With the fisherman floats, we've got sliding the boat club 10 feet one way or the other, or further out, and that's again, we've got to see if it all fits. The other thing, we had talked about, Blake, was Skyhook and moving them to the other side as well.
Yeah, that's right, Bill. So I haven't gone through the things on this side yet, but let's start there. So we had a great sort of in-depth conversation with one of the Skyhook owners, and got to understand that, you know, if he had it his way, that it would be helpful to have a paved zone. Right now, it's just grass, as you probably know, for their operation. And, you know, it is a seasonal operation for the most part. So it's not like they're there all the time. So there was some discussion, you know, if that were to be paved, could it serve dual duty, you know, and it's not being used by the Skyhook. But you know, they need to be able to back their truck up with their train and crane rather. And for the most part, this spot is preferable from their standpoint, as I understand it, because it allows boats to get in and out in an area that they seem to think is preferable. The one other request that they had mentioned is that there's a light post that so far they've avoided impacting. That's part of the park. But if that were to move, then that would be one less obstruction, you know, in their way. So that was kind of the point of view I'd heard from the Skyhook folks or representative who was there. After the site walk, we also received comments from the Parks and Beautification Committee that, you know, was saying that their position on that is that actually they'd like to see that operation move to the commercial fishing side of the harbor. And, you know, I just imagine that that's because most of this zone, aside from that Skyhook operation and the ramp, are more public uses, and there's a lot more activity out here, especially in the height of summer. And so there was just a sort of another point of view on that. So, you know, Brad was kind enough to meet with us like last week, and he said he would check in with the Skyhook operator and just kind of test the waters, I guess, on, you know, would it be conceivable that those operations do find a place on the commercial fishing side. And I know he's not able to make it today because of another commitment that he has, but he did pass along that he reached out to them and that their preference, you know, is to stay in that location. But you know, if they were to move, that would just need to be coordinated with other activities, obviously on the commercial side, to make sure that, you know, their operations are successful. I mean, I think the one thing that everyone agrees on is, you know, it's a successful business and we, you know, there's a need for that service. So it's not, you know, should that operation happen, it's just a matter of, you know, is the current location the most optimal spot for it? Now that we're sort of looking at, you know, trying to get all these puzzle pieces to fit together. Not sure if there are other folks who have comments on that one.
I think it's a little clustered.
I mean, more, I can tell you.
On that side, I think it's like you start thinking the mooring balls, you start thinking of all the stuff that goes in the. I mean, I've got 100 traps on a trailer right now, and I'm just one of many fishermen. It should be too clustered.
For the 2 weeks that we had Skyhook on that side, I had more altercations with everybody than for the 3 years they've been on the other side, and never has there been a pedestrian issue or a, do I think that's the ideal place to have a crane operation? No, but it's, I see both sides of it. But then when I look at the operations of what's happening there, that spot is very, if we made it a little more dedicated to what they're doing, yeah, they shouldn't be on the grass. Like, they shouldn't be putting roughs in the grass.
Right.
But if we dedicated it to what it was supposed to be, and maybe had like where we put the ballards so that it kind of blocks the parking so people can walk in front of it in my office, maybe if we put some of those out that they have to move so that people aren't thinking that it's a, let's have a picnic over here. This is a, but from a marine, operations standpoint, that area and putting sailboats in and out, I mean, it was an absolute cluster, whether it was the sailboats having to deal with the, the owners not being able to get out and had to tow them out of there, or, the fishermen having, total screaming matches and I have to go play referee. I mean, it was just, it was just a mess. But over here, I see everybody's point, but that's the point, that because the time that they're doing the mass is the time that all of the fishermen are loading their gear.
It's just.
If it happened when they were just loading their catch, that would be a different story, because that happens up here, but it's the gear loading and the mass stepping. If we could figure out a way to dedicate it and have nobody coming in to drive around and turn around in there, maybe. I mean, if you say, nope, it's not a parking lot anymore because you have the going, coming, the going. I mean, I was just
Bill?
over there playing referee.
Yeah, I'm chair of the Parks Committee, and in our March meeting, we had this discussion talking about the resiliency plan. And the Parks Committee is dead set against having Skyhook there. We've always been dead set against that. This is a park, public land, and particularly when you start talking about paving part of the park and moving lampposts and stuff, it seems to me that's kind of mission creep. That's a park over there. And that's what we want to see it be, and not have commercial projects starting to encroach on that area. And we feel very strongly about that. We sent a note to Jonathan and also to Blake, so he's aware of it. So from our standpoint, paving it and moving it is preferable. It's just not, it's great for them. I understand it. I've been at public meetings where they've talked to the select board about their fees and stuff, and there are a lot of people that support the work that they do. And we're all for that, just not on a public park. Again, it's kind of mission creep on their part.
All right, so what I'm hearing is, and I hear you, I think Blake, and I'm thinking out loud, I think what I'd like to do is, you had some ideas or have some ideas about sort of reconfiguring the park to some degree. Maybe we should kind of go through that to see if your thoughts or ideas inform whether or not Skyhook's area is still not good, which I respect and understand.
It's not. I don't care what they come up with. That corner of the park there, we've got benches there. There's the launching area, there's a lot of traffic. It ruins the grass. Parks Committee doesn't want to have a commercial activity on the park side. There's that whole dirt area over there. I don't know all the logistics, what's involved, but let's keep the commercial stuff on the commercial side.
No, understood, and I'm hearing you.
But it's also like saying that the tourists shouldn't be on the fisherman's side, on the commercial or the river side, which always happens too.
I get it.
Just put it out there.
Yeah, I think this is an appropriate discussion in that.
Yeah.
I think the whole thing is called the Harbor Park,
Right.
And, part of the job of this master plan is
Figure it out.
determine how to use it.
Everybody
Yeah.
working together and understanding everyone's point of view.
So we're here, I think anybody have anything, other than the fact that you don't like to smell it, right?
Well, yeah, just
Just
this,
smell
I just personally like
You're right.
being there, unloading my rowboat next to Skyhook, the fumes blasting at me. Just, I happen to be there, twice in a week and they were there doing their job and it's just, not pleasant.
Yeah.
They certainly to continue, doing their business. It would be helpful for me to understand. So how many years ago did Skyhook operate on the other side?
When they first started, so I think they've had 2 seasons, 2 full seasons on where they are now.
Okay,
And the first year that they tried to do it, I said, no, you gotta try to do it over on the other side. So on the dirt side,
okay.
and that was the absolute calamity.
So if they were they near where the hoist is now?
They were kind of up, kind of by the boat club fence. So like, I don't know if you knew where there was
The
a.
best
boat
spot
used
to
to
bring
be.
boat
Yeah,
is gonna be the closest spot to the boat club.
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah,
And the conflict is that that's true for the fishermen and for the
to
sailboats.
put their boat alongside, load their gear on,
right.
and it was not, and and maybe there's a solution that I'm unaware of, maybe if we dredge, they could go up, everybody could go up the river a little bit more, I don't know, I do know that if that's the decision is not to put Skyhook there, that space, that wrapped corner will be a great spot for more dinghies. So, I'm just thinking about all the use of that space, it's no man's land, I mean, it's all about priorities, what we wanna prioritize, that's a service that I think, like Doug said, people want, and we wanna see happen somewhere. If it's not gonna be there, it would be, see those floats that come down towards the right there in the corner? If that would come along, if that could continue that float system,
And
more
what were
digging.
some of the issues of the problems on the other side, the dirt side? What were the calamity?
Well, so their boom truck's pretty big, so if they're if they're parallel, they have to set up, the mast, they have to actually they need a little bit of real estate. So they're bringing their masts in, parking is the total issue, they're bringing the masts in, and they have to lay them out to rig them up before they put on, and it's narrow in there, so you get people dropping their kids off, you get people dropping, you get the general traffic coming through, then you get fishermen coming in to do to load their traps. Then you get people coming in, trying to put their sailboats in, coming with the current, and their nose gets off and they get pinned, and I've had to tow a couple people off there. It's just, and for the, these aren't commercial mariners that are coming in, so to speak. So they're recreational boaters, and none of which, can really get the current and all the things. So it ends up, and when they've been on this side, like Doug said, like, again, I see the point, but they haven't had that, like you're saying,
The real estate is there.
the real estate is there, the space is there, the boats can go in and out easily, people can leave their boat there, people can put a mast in the
It's like
corner.
fall, it's spring and.
It's spring and fall, yeah.
Perfect time.
If this.
Well, what do we mean when we say the real estate's there? I mean, that's
Yeah.
Memorial Park, Harbor Park,
It's,
you know what I mean?
you can say that there, if you go there, look there now, I totally get that what you're saying about it being a park, but there aren't any picnic tables there, people do sit, the benches aren't there.
Yeah, there are.
Because we
The benches are.
No, they're not, they're down, they're totally clear.
There was never mast falling over.
Yeah, I mean, maybe to Bill's point, like the park, I think will play into this discussion a little bit. And we did some thinking about how, to make potentially the park more resilient to flooding. And it might actually help inform the conversation on Skyhook a little bit if we show not just kind of this existing plan, but also how this spot might start to transform potentially. I'm not saying, that there's a perfect answer yet, but that might just help us like with the discussion. Do you think it would be all right if we, I progress a little bit and we can circle back to this one once we've covered that piece?
I have one more thing to ask though, sorry. I think the time when the masts are going in and coming out, when Skyhook is being used, the old dirt side is also being used. I mean, you see the boats that are out of water there. That's being used for them coming and going. You've got obviously the fishermen and all of their equipment coming and going, as well as their trucks. You have all sorts of random boat club people, and you have a whole pile of pedestrians that walk through there. And crane operations with pedestrians underneath is a terrible idea.
Yeah.
Now, I fully appreciate that, you know, you have a potential for that in the park as well, but that's more of a corner or an area that could sort of almost more easily be cordoned off. And certainly if experience says, you know, this side was a disaster, this side makes some people less happy, but seems to be safer and functions better.
Well, I
that
think
certainly should be considered.
the underlying issue again is encroachment of commercial activity, no matter what it is. You know, you could bring a fuel truck in there to, you know, fill up a lobster boat or a sailboat or something. So that is public property. And you start to get the encroachment of commercial use in it.
Understood.
Against.
And so I understand, and I think let's just table this discussion, let's let Blake go through some of his ideas. And we don't have to solve it tonight, we're just all getting our, you know.
Positions on the table.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Blake, with what you're
Okay.
thinking.
Sure. So just the last two notes on this one real quick were that the harbor master's office needs consideration, just given what we saw with flood mapping, particularly in the like very long-term scenario. And then there was also mention on this side of the harbor that, you know, there's that same issue of scour. And, you know, that's happening consistently and gets repaired, as I understand it, like every year. So we had heard mention that, you know, if there was some idea of an apron potentially around the perimeter that's flush with finished grade, that might be considered as a way to make it a little bit more robust. So those were just some notes that we had made during the site walk. And what we've started to develop is the presentation deck, a draft version for the next public meeting. So I might just go back to the beginning so that we can flip through and give you all a sense of what we had in mind. And that way you can let us know what could be better. We've got about 3 weeks to refine this. So some of the folks who would attend, I guess I can go into full screen mode for y'all. So some folks who will attend this session are likely new to the project, but we don't want to repeat in full kind of what we did in the first one. So I think quickly we would just recap the project scope, and then we would highlight that the limits are just the public areas that include Marine Park and Walker Park. Show them that, you know, as they're probably well aware, there's been impacts from storms. And so this is an opportunity to be proactive instead of reactive. We can highlight the project schedule for folks so they understand where we've been and where we're going. So we would highlight that they're sort of in the midpoint on the May 29th meeting. And the goal of this meeting is to share some preliminary ideas. Then there's still time to refine those before a meeting that would be in July. In between those larger public meetings, as you know, are a series of task force meetings. And also we did that site walk. So this just shows that chronology. We would quickly hit on the flood mapping. So this is FEMA's flood map. This is what WSP was able to develop, looking at 2030, 2050, and 2100 for Marine Park, and the same for Walker Park. We would highlight that the study is looking at a number of factors. So, you know, the working waterfront, uses and activities, history and ecology. And then we might go to the results from the public survey that was circulated at the last public meeting. And as you can see here, there were 131 folks who returned surveys, and those who returned hard copies, those were scanned, and we input that data with the rest of the online data. So that's all reflected in these results that I'm sharing today. So that was shared with the Harbor Committee, Conservation Commission, Parks and Beautification Commission, the task force, and general community members. So most of the results, by the time we had 131 results, were from the community at large. We asked if they were aware that flooding has already impacted Rockport during storm events. Almost everyone was aware, but few people weren't. That just tells us that we probably don't need to spend a heck of a lot of time recapping, the storm activity. I think people are familiar. What aspects of Rockport's harbor do they value most? And public access to the water and the working waterfront were really the two main drivers. And then after that, it was recreation, parks and open space, rich sense of history, livability, ecology, other, and we can look at that, and tourism. So really no one's party, or certainly not the majority of people, are prioritizing tourism. It's really about, the local community, how that serves as a, jobs and, occupations for so many folks with working waterfront right there. And also, it's a rare spot for folks in the general public to be able to get to the water. And so that's just so important. These were the responses for other. So some folks added things like natural beauty, the Rockport Boat Club, and some other things. And we will include all this data in the sort of final report that's issued also. And this can also be posted online. And that way people can see, all of the input that's been received to date. The next question said, what potential flood impacts concern you most? And impacts to infrastructure was the top one, followed by impacts to public parks, ecological degradation, and impacts to businesses. And the hope, with this one was that we were thinking about, the working waterfront as businesses, in the project area. But some folks in the comment section said, impacts to the working waterfront is, really important. So I'm not sure that everyone connected like this option for the answer. So a lot of these others were also impacts to business. So I just point that out because it might be a little bit of a higher percentage, if you were to combine the two, impacts to business and other. And then these were just blanks where folks could, share other thoughts that they have. And this has been really valuable. We didn't want to, insist that people only answer in one way or another. And so it's pretty wide ranging, the responses that we see. I mean, some people were saying, it's absolutely critical that the solutions are, thinking about how to embrace nature-based solutions, and others were saying, it's really important to maintain things the way they are. And so it's really a full spectrum, as you might expect, depending on folks' point of view and their interaction with these places. So this exercise is going to be about trying to bring these all together. So we would share the site walk feedback we were thinking after that survey feedback. So just as we just did for this meeting, we can go through this slide. We'll make those updates that you all had mentioned and incorporate that into this one. And then we'll go into 6 key drivers. So because the responses are so varied, we thought it might be helpful to look at trends. So before we came up with, resilience strategies, we thought it would be important to just sort of distill all of that information into some guiding principles. So the first key driver is to support the working waterfront. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that, this boat ramp is absolutely essential. And, we've talked in great detail about all the activity over here. We certainly understand that that's a key driver for this project. Not to mention that there's likely $2 million in funding to help, preserve that into the future, which would be amazing. Also, we've heard, that we need to preserve the boat club legacy, and that's incredibly important. We've also heard that we need to enhance public access. I mean, you just saw the slide. After 131 responses, the number one response was, we've got to have public access. And others said, that they look to this as a spot to host community activities and events. I think in the last round, we talked about just some of those, like the donut festivals and various things, but really it's the day-to-day activities also that, this open space serves and is so vital. There's enabling harbor operations. So, it's awesome that Abby's been so giving of her time. We've learned a lot about, the harbor from the harbor master, and just given the location of the harbor master's office and flood mapping, there needs to be thought given to how those operations continue to work in the future. And then not to forget about Walker Park. That is a really vibrant, spot for youth in particular, but another beautiful way to access nature in the harbor. And so that might be an opportunity to foster ecology, education, and play. And so if you combine all those things, what is starting to appear to us is that hopefully the resulting recommendation isn't one that favors any one group at the expense of the others. So it should be, we feel, to succeed, be a balanced solution, right? Where it works for the working waterfront. It still is an awesome public open space. There's opportunities to enhance ecology. And so this diagram is getting at this idea that we don't want folks to feel like they need to, have a singular solution, that it should be multifaceted and balanced. So maybe I'll just pause on the drivers. I mean, this was just our first pass at it. I don't know if you folks think that this sounds about right, or if there are any like really important high level things that you feel we're missing so far.
All
So
good?
far,
Good.
so far, so
Right.
good. So then for draft resilience strategies, what we started to do is just take the site survey and color it in so that hopefully it's more easily understood. So this is just existing conditions that you see today. We can orient people, center town's over here. That's your access in as you currently have it today. The darker green is the sloped area. The white things are your kilns. The light gray is parking and access. And over here, where it's sort of peach, that's the gravel zone for the commercial area. The lighter gray, that's your paved zone, et cetera, et cetera. And then we'll talk, I guess, about each of the potential elements. So the first one was just looking at Rockport Boat Club. And you're all familiar that that's impacted by storms, not just today, but as Todd had shown in the last meeting, by 2100, during a storm event, it, is potentially very impacted based on these flood scenarios. So this building is not very big, which is a good thing. It seems like it would make a lot of sense to elevate this structure. The current elevation is at 9. We're thinking that elevating the finished floor to around 15.5 might be the way to go, because that would mean that your finished floor is meeting your midterm projections, even for the 1% base flood elevation scenario. And if you're going through the expense of lifting a building, you don't really want to go up 1 foot at a time and in 10 years have the same problem on your hands. So the thinking is that, you look at that time horizon. So here's an image of the boat club today. Here's just a mock-up of like how that might be facilitated. So, you could raise the building about 6 feet, but you might want to break that into 2 transitions. So there could be about a 3-foot step from, the porch down to a landing zone surrounding the building. And then from there, it might be another 3 feet down to existing grade. And, of course, the masonry chimney piece would need to be considered, but the timber frame building itself should be able to be lifted. And whether they just elect to rebuild the fireplace and that sort of thing, I think that could be done. But this graphic is just saying, that might be a way for this building to have minimal change. But I can pause there. I don't know if Nancy or others want to comment on that piece of it.
Looks like a nice idea.
All right,
Yeah,
cool.
the trouble with the pit will be the amount of lawn in front of the building.
That gets taken away.
Yeah, it's certainly reduced, so,
Yes,
but
right.
we can hash through that.
I mean, I think that, I think you would look at whatever, could you go the full, 9 feet and not layer it, what I'm like,
Yeah, well, we
And
don't
then-
even have the
I
detail,
know.
this is an implication.
Yeah. because you want kind of a larger gathering space for people.
Yeah,
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 gotta be.
I think that makes sense that you would want the gathering space. And from this view, you're not really looking at the top down, right? So it's hard to know like how much space do you get? So we could work on a plan view, to show like where would the wall make the most sense to give you as much usable space as possible, that sort of thing. But in general, the thinking is, that it could be achievable and that it wouldn't look necessarily bad if it's well designed. And then the question becomes, well, if you're raising the boat club and the surrounds to some extent so that it functions well, then what happens over here at the commercial fishing side where there was some discussion of raising grade potentially or trying to protect those utilities and things? And also, does the building shift if you're going to raise it? So this was just a version where I slid the thing over. I mean, it's conceptual. So then you would have more space on that side, um, uh, potentially for commercial fishing. So there could be, thought given to whether that arrangement works better for folks or everyone prefers it where it is. For the working wharf, the current elevation's around 8. And you can see that even by the midterm scenario at 2050, your highest annual tide's already at 8.7. And then by 2100, that's up to 11.1. And it's not so much that this area can't be overtopped, right? Like, water going over asphalt or concrete in the middle of like a really severe storm event isn't ruining the commercial fishing activity. The issue, as we understand it, is, some of the utilities in this area, any structures that are here that, is part of the operations, like those types of things need to be located in such a way that they're not impacted. But, if you raise grade like 2 feet, then it might actually work out where you then have a better transition over to the boat club because you've just raised the boat club 6 feet. So if you raise grade here too, then you don't end up with funny conditions where the commercial fishing zone interfaces with the boat club. And also it sounded like there would be some advantages, if this grade is slightly raised from Rockport Marine's standpoint, as I had mentioned, where there was low clearance for trailers. And then from there, you could locally elevate, the utilities and any sort of structure above that. So this would still overtop in some scenarios if it's 2 feet higher, but I don't think that's a problem. And Todd Coffin had said he would just want to model, elevating the grade to make sure that there's no unintended consequences from wave energy, reverberating off of this. I mean, today's discussion talked a little bit about what happens if, there's an extension on this corner. So I'm sure Todd Coffin would say, if we do that, like he would want to put that in the model too, I'm sure. But if that's just on piles, then, can't imagine that there's a lot of impact associated with that. And then additional lighting, I mean, it could be done in a number of ways, but I just indicated that that would be captured. And then also on this edge of the commercial fishing zone, we had talked about paving a 6 feet concrete apron to protect from scour. So that's captured. And, you know, these piles that you see here, those could be continued along the waterfront. For Skyhook, you know, if it did move to the working waterfront side, there are examples of kind of cool hypergraphics. They have been used in commercial settings also for designating like where different uses happen. So one thought was, I know that, you know, people think of the park side as sort of the park and this side as the working waterfront. But if you're going through the process of like elevating a portion of it and paving it, and you're trying to make sure that people know where to go, or like if you're a pedestrian, like this is not the, you know, the middle of the walkway, this is where Skyhook goes. There could be some interesting or creative ways, I think, to mark uses so that it's clear to the public and easier for the operators to function. This was that corner toward Rockport Marine where we need to adjust the turning radius. You can see the state of that tree on the last visit. I mean, it's not doing so well. And, you know, oftentimes where there are projects like this, rather than trying to keep a poorly located tree that's failing, you know, there's an opportunity, I would think, to, you know, plant new trees in better locations that are healthy and actually in the long term are going to provide a lot more habitat than what this thing would do. So there might be a scenario like that for those who, you know, might be concerned about that particular tree. So any questions on that side before we go to the park side?
Yeah, when we were talking about raising the grade 2 feet, what do you do on the water side? And this actually applies to the whole area here. Do you just add more riprap, or do you put in, what are those corrugated sheets called?
Sheet piles, or do you just put more granite blocks?
Sheet piles in there. You know, adding pilings in front of the granite blocks just doesn't seem real strong.
Yeah.
It certainly adds to the atmosphere, but are we gonna wanna start putting in some of these sheet pilings to protect the granite behind it? How does that get handled?
Yeah, I think you asked a really good question. And I mean, Todd Coffin has talked about the various options, and just as you were running through them, they have different pros and cons. I guess, you know, we haven't landed on like one specific edge condition just yet. I mean, the thought was first, if we, you know, test the waters with raising grade in this elevation, if folks are saying, yes, that'd be helpful for the reasons you identified, and yep, it would also work well with the boat club, then I think in the next step is like, okay, so what does that edge look like? And how does that then tie into what's happening at the boat club also? Because it could be done in all of the ways that you had identified. Because this edge is so exposed and it's in the VE zone, you know, it wouldn't be the spot where you would have a nature-based solution on this edge, right? I mean, there needs to be access for the commercial fishing operation to work. So it's going to be a hardened edge in this location. It's just a matter of what is most appropriate. And each of those have a different cost. So, you know, the final report is also looking at high-level ROM costs and what, you know, might be shown in that is like, okay, if you do a sheet pile wall here, it costs X. If you do the granite block wall here, it costs X. And if you do riprap, it costs X. And that would give folks kind of a menu, I think, so that, you know, as you look at costs of the other proposed elements, you can figure out like where you want to prioritize your budget. Because even though the granite might look better to some, you might end up with riprap that's less costly here to save your pennies for, you know, something else that, is more important, I could see it developing that way. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. And it might be different solutions in different areas.
Yes, that I'm sure it would be as well. So that was kind of the commercial side of things. And then on the park side, after going back to the site a number of times and thinking about what we're learning through the discussions to date, it seems like this is not a location where like every inch of this park needs to be waterproofed. Sort of like we were talking about with the commercial side, having waves over top, you know, can be acceptable. And there are, lots of communities that live with floodable parks where they're just designed to flood. The problem right now is that this park wasn't really designed to flood. So when it floods, it fails. So rather than trying to keep the water out 100%, the thinking is, what could we do to improve the resilience of the park, and at the same time, hopefully, make it work for all of the different uses that people have brought forward. So this was showing the highest astronomical tide flooding in present day, 2030, 2050, 2100. So by 2100, you're up to 11 feet and at the toe of slope. But, it's incremental. So we may not have to make all of the changes to this zone right away, because by 2050, it's anticipated that there'd be a lot less, flooding even during the highest astronomical tide. So here's what Marine Park looks like today. And, there's scour and displacement that gets replaced every year. And everybody says, the access and public access is super important. And so the thinking for this one was, gosh, when you look at this park today, it has a lot going for it in that the views are like unmatched. It's well located, and it offers a lot of opportunity for flexibility, which means that it works for so many different people. But one of the things this park doesn't really have is like a clear circulation network for pedestrians. Like if you're a car, you know where to go. But if you're a pedestrian, as you can see, like where things get worn down, or there's a lot of kind of vehicular pedestrian conflict, I think, in part because there's no real dedicated paths. So one thought was, if you were creating an apron to help with reducing the amount of scour, like would that ever become this sort of public boardwalk, and you'd be able to get an accessible path at the edge of the park. So, one of the things folks think about when they're designing circulation networks and paths is what happens if you're in a wheelchair, what happens if you're in a walker, like how does everyone use this park? And one thing that would be enhanced greatly by having a hardened surface at the edge is that then it's universally accessible, or basically better for ADA access. And the surface of that, it could be raw concrete, but there are other projects like this one where then that concrete is laminated with timber, and this is not the same construction for your like flimsy deck. These things are like really built with details that are like way more robust, and anticipating water will overtop. But when it does, it's fine. It just, floods in certain conditions, and then the flood waters withdraw and it's fine. So it could be that there's a timber surface, it could be that it's stone, it could just be the raw concrete. But the point is that maybe there's like a circulation network that develops and makes it more accessible and provides greater resilience, and then you don't have to repair as much stuff at the end of the day. This drawing was just showing, okay, if you had that sort of outer perimeter for circulation, then how do you get to that from the other access points? And so all of those could be linked together. And, it would work much as it does today. But over time, you could fill in and raise portions of the park. I mean, we would see that happening through a sort of landscape strategy. You've already got a really big slope leading from the park uphill to town. But there could be additional sort of topography or mounds created that help to raise some portions of the park out of floodwaters over time, and also create spaces where, you know, even if there's like that turnaround or parking for the boat ramp on one side of the park, if you were to mound up toward that end, then when you're in the park, you're not looking right at a bunch of tailpipes and exhaust and, you know, everybody queuing. You're kind of reoriented back toward the water because of the slope. So there could be some benefits to topography. And a lot of people, I think, would hope that the biodiversity of the park might be enhanced. So right now there's a lot of lawn, which I'm sure requires a heck of a lot of mowing. If there's opportunities to create sort of planting pockets in the park, then you would be creating more habitat for wildlife and things, also treating stormwater, and you'd have less to mow. So there might be a way to balance those things together. These are just other examples of how projects or communities have integrated some of that topography along with the boardwalk at the edge. So they could look more modern, they could look more rustic, but the overall intent would just be, you know, when you're thinking about making a floodable park and sort of embracing change over time, that it gets coordinated in this way. You'd still be able to have your bigger events out there, that sort of thing. Any comments on like the park piece? Not so much.
Yeah, that, if you do have that, a park where it's, solid, that would help sky, whatever hook, whatever it is, that it actually has looks like there's a solid foundation. So if you're having that boardwalk type thing, it would be given a place to be. You wouldn't have to put it in the dirt. That would
Yeah.
help.
Right. I mean, if it were to be hardened, then you're right that might provide opportunity for access. I guess the other question is just, you know, we would probably then want to have, as someone had mentioned earlier, I guess it was Abby, you know, some way of demarcating, you know, that the public is not supposed to like continue walking right on the edge of that spot. I mean, in looking at the circulation diagram, like I'll show you an idea about creating an access point. Like today, you can go, as I'm sure you all know, from the location up here to, you can go down the slope and then you hit like a really steep stair and it's not so great. But in the future, there's a thought that you might actually be able to have that ramp continue and create like an accessible path from the upland to the park level that's ADA accessible. It's also bikeable and just a pleasant way to get down there. If you were to do that, then we thought that the most logical way for folks to circulate is to move as they do today on this side, and rather than sort of cut through the middle of the roundabout, it would be safer if folks continued on and there was like a crossing point to the park that was designated sort of here. So if that's your loop, then maybe there's a pedestrian network that starts to form that creates like a safe way to go where, you know, there's very few interactions with cars. And if that were to be done, you know, then I guess the question is, you know, if Skyhook was there, would that still, you know, work for folks, or would folks feel like it was really important to continue, you know, all the way to the terminus? To be determined.
Launching the boats that Walter was saying,
just
boats coming in.
Like having a natural sort of
Right.
bifurcation from what's already happening, because, you know, it is commercial activity to launch.
Yeah, it was pointed out that pedestrian traffic around the launch ramp was a bit of an issue.
Yeah, definitely is.
Yeah,
And pedestrian like, in general, in the parking lot, we've had two cars versus kids that actually got hit, one of which my nephew. Because it's just a terrible flow.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah.
It's dangerous.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, the hope is that, this gets configured in such a way that it's really clear like where the path is, and then you can, have a landscape buffer between the path and the roundabout, or use mechanisms that really would encourage folks to stay on the designated path. And that way cars know where to look for people and people know where to look for cars. So it could be a lot safer, I think. This version is just testing out the idea that parking gets reconfigured. This actually has more parking spaces than what you have out there today. The parking is not laid out in the most efficient manner. And so, the thinking here was that by making this more linear, you then create a more contiguous park space. And there's still access out to the pier from the cars, but there's another, 30 feet or so that you're moving materials. So one of the thoughts was perhaps in this next iteration, we could share with folks, um, you know, 2 or 3 different ways that the parking could be configured here and get their reactions on that, to see if one of them might be more optimal. I mean, if you're investing in making this place more resilient, it just seems prudent to make it function for what you need. So this would be sort of one configuration for parking. Another thought was, would you ever push the parking back in toward the slope? And if you did that, you're also able to have as much parking as you have today. But what ends up happening for the park is that it's actually expanded. So in this version, what happened was you were able to gain real estate for the park here and make a larger sort of contiguous open space by pushing the road and parking this way. So just different options that we were starting to study relative to the park. These would all be like further refined and labeled, and it's just, they're not finalized yet, so they're a little abstract, but that could be improved ahead of the session in a few weeks.
What's the current thinking from a landscape architect standpoint about railings around the top of the bulkhead? That this town, when we've ever had this discussion, most people think that if you put up some sort of a railing or a rope barrier, it just creates liability for the town if something goes wrong. Whereas by just having the occasional pilings, which gives you a visual edge, even though, people can run between it, fall off, that sort of places the burden of liability on the pedestrian. What, picture just leaving pilings or having some sort of a definitive railing around that hardened border?
Right. I mean, I think that the recommendation would be to have a rail. And there's a few reasons for that. One is that if you have that hardened edge, it feels more like a walkway. And that's kind of a different scenario than what you have out there today, where folks aren't necessarily encouraged to walk right up along the edge. So if folks are finding that path, then there's likely, going to be more congestion there. And I don't know if you've seen what pedestrians do these days, but they're on their phones. And so, while hopefully they can swim and we can fish them out, it, in our experience, is a good idea to sort of plan for, that edge to be more user friendly. So I think railing might be a good way to go. I mean, there'd obviously be gates where you need access to the gangways and all that. And I'm sure something could be done about like the zone where people jump off today. Like maybe that gets some thought where it's pulled back, but I just don't think you would necessarily want that whole edge as exposed as it is today. Usually you would see a rail of some sort.
Okay.
Like, what do you think elevations and such in the park area itself.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've got that on a subsequent slide or.
Yeah, so I don't know the elevations marked on it, but we were thinking that the edge itself may stay close to where it is today, because if you look at those flood maps, then for the most part, overtopping is not a huge concern in the day-to-day at this point. And then build up beyond that over time is what we're thinking, Bill. And then that way, you're preserving access out to the pier and your gangways still operate and all of that. We're not messing everything up right away. Seems like over time, there could be further consideration given. So for, getting to the park, I'm sure you all know. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, could you go back one or two?
Yeah. Is it this one?
Yeah, either of those. So if you move across from where the park green space is, if the road moves up that way, I think you do have to be a little careful about the corner that goes up.
Yeah.
And that's sharp already. And I mean, I know I don't have a very big boat, but when I bring mine down there, it's pretty tight. And if you had I'm not that good a driver either, but if you had a very big trailer and that corner gets tighter,
Yeah.
it may become impossible to actually get down there for,
Okay.
yeah. So
Yeah.
right about there.
Yep.
Yeah.
So one thought was we might be able to, and I just haven't had time to refine this, but move it back to like where it is today on that corner and then pull it toward the toe of slope. So if we were to do that, then we're not making it any worse than what you have today. And so it might mean that this thing is, more of this shape than what you're seeing on screen. But I think that's a good point. I think Orion or someone had pointed that out. I just haven't had a chance to finish that. But the idea is, yeah, why don't we keep it on the same alignment to avoid any unintended impacts on the corner? But I still think that this space is like no man's land and it's on the other side of parking. And I'm like, gosh, it would make a lot of sense, I think, to push that way. And you still tie into the boat ramp and stuff, so that shouldn't be impacted.
Sure, if that corner gets too tight, the utility of the boat ramp goes to a very small number
Yeah.
of people.
Yeah.
And that was less interesting. Also, most phones are waterproof, so I don't care if they go on.
So how do people feel generally about the area, like where the concerts are?
Well, it looks like it shrunk quite a bit in the first half one.
Go back to that one with the park.
First one with the parking.
Like this one.
No,
No, whoops.
Oh, what'd you do?
This one.
Hang on,
We lost you.
we lost the screen for a second.
Okay.
We have-
I'll just-
We'll get it back.
okay. Let me
There
know.
it is.
Are you
There you
talking
go.
about this one, Nancy?
did that take away a bunch of green space?
So this one left the road like right where it is today. And then this parking is right where you have it today. But then it took all the parking that was like here and it stretched it along here. So if we like did it, maybe what I should do for these is actually have the area of park. Because what I think you'll see is that this zone is the same like area. It's just that it's now stretched out long, whereas before it was wider because like this area here would have been green. But the thinking was by doing that, instead of folks crossing like here across a parking lot to get to the rest of the park, it's just all park, and you've just got people wheeling stuff out to the pier. So there was less, pedestrian vehicular conflict if you do that.
It's a little less frisbee friendly, or kicking a ball around, but
I agree. I agree. That's why I thought this idea of pushing the parking up like makes sense, because if you do that, then you get the same width you have today, and this connection here, we don't have to have. Like if folks are fine with just extending access in the form of sort of a boardwalk there, we could get rid of this, vehicular access, and you would have big park space. I mean, is that what you think the Parks Committee would want? I mean, I think that would be really nice to have it as wide as you have today, but
You're not
not have it cut up with cars.
into the hill. Yeah. I like that.
So-
And would you keep the main area of the park, not next to Abby's office, but the stuff to the right? Would you keep that the same elevation, or would you change the grade in there?
I think, Bill, we would recommend elevating grade over time. So, I think if you do that, I would elevate it at this edge. If you see my hand, because then you're buffering like the noise and exhaust and all this stuff that's happening over here, and you're giving people elevated spots to be that look out toward the harbor. So if you've got a railing, it's really kind of cool to elevate this so people are looking up over past the rail. You're looking over each other, and you actually probably have better views out to the water as a result.
Does this concept that we're looking at now, does this have the hardened boardwalk?
It should. I can add it in. I mean, I think that all of them should have that.
I agree.
Does the Harry need,
Vehicle access.
access for the people in wheelchairs and on the boat?
It still could be ADA without vehicular, access.
I think it'd be good to have a provision
A
to
provisional, you could
occasionally.
get there if you needed
Yeah.
to, but it wouldn't be like an open to all cars.
I mean, the challenge with this one is the turning radius, right?
Yeah, so like, I know, and I think we talked to Todd a little bit about exploring different, entrance and egress to the park. Has that been considered at all? Thought
Yeah.
about?
Yep. So there is that study. So I think with this one, Bill, we can just, realign the parking. So you still get like that thickened spot. In terms of Abby, your question, like what happens for additional access, you're talking about the study that brought another access point in here, right?
Like an in and an out, like a one way in, one way out.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that could be done. I mean, right now we're not planning anything in here. So, maybe what we do is show that on the plan, maybe as dash, and then we could, talk to folks about, that being included. I think what I've heard so far is that it's probably pretty costly to put the road in. So it will just come down, I think, in the end to what people want to invest in from a funding standpoint, right? And how important that additional access is. I mean, it would certainly be nice. I can tell today that this is pretty tight, and like you have to do some gymnastics to get into this from a certain direction. So it's
We
worth.
have accident, like a major issue there. We've had plenty of vehicles get hung up on the rail trying to turn right. But
Yeah.
why we haven't, boat versus vehicle coming up,
So one question about this concept,
yeah.
if we if we shorten the distance from the, bulkhead wall to the parking area, in other words, the park area, and we have the parking immediately adjacent to the park. In other words, it's on I guess that'd be on the east side, if you will. In other words, people don't have to cross the street, or the driving area.
Yeah.
If you push the parking into the kilns and where the locomotive is and the bell, then people are crossing that traffic pattern
To get
to get to the park,
right.
or vice versa,
Yeah.
right? So from a safety perspective, do you have a thought as to which would be preferable?
Hmm.
You know what I'm getting at?
Yeah, no, I do, because you still have to cross that. Everybody's gonna cross that, whereas now,
Right.
yeah, it just is like a.
I mean, maybe do traffic calming of some sort, I don't know what, but I guess my only, for me, I like having the additional park space, but that pushes all the parking on, out by the kilns, in effect.
Yeah.
So they have to all cross.
In this scenario, Bill, like these like brown bars are envisioned as parking. here. So you've got like 2/3 of the parking on the park side, and then say 1/3 on the Kiln side. So I feel like this one has most on this side. Um, but I think that's a good point. What we're trying to do is limit the number of people who are crossing the road. So the hope is that we kind of organize as many as we can on this side of it.
I don't have an answer for it.
Yeah.
I'm just bringing
No,
up this
yeah.
Potential issue.
And most people are just sitting their cars right up at that bulkhead right now.
Right, that's
But the
what they would
wonderful
love to
view for
do.
the cars.
Yeah.
Don't have to get out.
But to be said, there's a lot of people that that don't have the mobility to get out and walk to a bench.
Right.
That spend, a good part of their day sitting in their much water, which is, pretty valid.
Yeah, I think, Abby, that's a great point, and I'm sure that some of these spaces here right on the park side, we could identify as like ADA spots. You have to have a certain percentage by code anyway, as you all know. And then if we had, again, paths through the park to the boardwalk,
Yeah.
then we'd be on our way, I think. Well, that's helpful. I think we can progress that thing. I'm a little conscious of like how much time we have left. So I'll just flip to the end of the deck, which was just looking at, okay, how do you get to the park? And if you're in the park, how do you get to wherever else you're going? So there's this awesome sidewalk. Unfortunately, it's not on the Marine Park side of the road. So, folks are crossing over, and the question is, how do you get from there into the park? It seems like there might actually be a good opportunity to move pedestrians away from the drive that's used by all the vehicles going in and out with all their boats, and steer them toward this entry if that were to be improved. So right now it has a set of stairs, but they're pretty shallow, and then it's really flat. So like this could be regraded so that there aren't stairs. It's just a shallow ramp that like leads you around the corner. And like from there, it's an accessible path. And instead of having, rickety steps, what we were thinking is that you can just fold back on this slope. So this path becomes this just gradual descent. And then if the bridge gets replaced and has sidewalks or bike facilities accommodated or associated with it that lead you to town, then you could see people going from the middle of town out and down this ramp to the waterfront, which I think could be really good. And it brings people close to this wall, which is a cool feature. And you could still have your kayak launch. So that's kind of like the new point of connection that we had in mind. We also just looked at the other points of connection, and we could share with folks just the various ways that people would be able to access the site in the future if we click through kind of like what that sequence looks like.
Just for the record, the new bridge that'll be going in about a year and a half from now does have a sidewalk on the harbor side of the bridge. It actually has one on both sides. But the one on the harbor side will have sidewalks, at least starting down next to the driveway there. So it'll be on the river side of the main driveway. But we probably should somehow get together with you to sort of show you the preliminary bridge designs we're working on.
Yeah.
How we saw it together into one nice sidewalk pathway.
Has that been issued? Conceptual?
No. It's all being digested right now.
I mean, I think that would be awesome. I mean, if you're able to email anything, that's great. Or I'm available if you want to meet or do a call, just let me know.
There's a few other questions. It's just said to.
I was just curious what the Harbor Master building is.
So, yeah, so that one is not quite as light as the boathouse, unfortunately. So the thinking is that, it's also, it seems, in the near term, less impacted by the waves. I mean, if you just look at the um, window locations on the backside of this thing, there's higher and there's not that many. So Todd's thought was, would we ever, in the near term, just do what's called dry flood proofing, which is mitigation measures that are done at the face of building where you have apertures or doors, and then sort of leave it where it is for now, and then harden the utilities that right now are at risk around the building. Um, and then for the longer term, I think Bill had the idea of, or asked the question, what would happen if the Harbor Masters building were to move up toward where you have the chessboard in like the long term? And I thought that was actually an interesting idea. Um, there's actually a pretty flat um, plateau that kind of extends from this entry drive over to where that chessboard area is. So, in the very long term, there probably does need to be another scenario for the Harbor Masters building. And the thought was, would it be conceivable to actually move it upslope? So it really is resilient, but curious to get Abby's thoughts on that. I don't know if that's just a stupid idea or worth entertaining.
No, I don't think, I mean, it wouldn't, it's a,
Cool view.
yeah. it'd be a
Would that be
beautiful
cheaper than, we'll get into the weeds, but is that cheaper than just new construction?
Yeah, I guess that's a good point at that junction. That could be looked at. Is it cheaper to rebuild or would you relocate? But I think that idea that Bill had was, it seemed really strong to me that that spot right now has ample room. The views from there are, pretty spectacular. And it's not far from the access drive and things. So, that does seem like a pretty optimal spot from our standpoint.
So you need to get an award, Blake. When do you need to leave?
Oh, I mean, it started at 5:30, but I don't know.
No.
We got it.
So we're 3 weeks ahead of the next public meeting. Is what you're hearing here directionally in the right place? Or is there, do you guys want to think about it and, shoot Orion, myself, an email saying, hey, what about this or whatever because we need to give Blake guidance to get to the next presentation, and we've got 3 weeks to do that. But general thoughts are good, bad, indifferent. Everybody's nodding their head, Blake, can't see.
Not everybody,
Oh, you're wrong.
of course. I was concerned about one thing. You keep talking about overtime, but 2050 is 25 years. It's gonna take a few years, I want to say a few years, a year to do design, a few years to do some lightweight, I call it really lightweight construction. It just buys you time until the inevitable gets here. All right, I had honestly expected to see more change in elevation on some of the key points. We have a wastewater, working waterfront grant that's coming up. That's I have no idea what that's gonna be for, right? That group still has to function, and there's little or nothing that's been done as far as pointing out what activities need to be done for the working waterfront to improve that. I just don't see any emphasis there whatsoever.
On elevation change?
For $2 million, yeah, 2 feet is insignificant. That's a rounding error. I was really surprised to see that. I mean, you talk about 3, 4, 5 years from now, you're gonna have a project that has to be redone in a few years.
20 more.
20 years, yeah, it's gonna have to, the whole thing has to be done again. So I don't see how the whatever grant is provided to the working waterfront, what is that gonna do in terms of, is the resiliency part of that grant, or is it for other things? I guess I'm asking Orion. I don't know what does that funding provide to the working waterfront?
Well, it's resiliency. The whole intent of why we got the 2 million is to raise the elevation.
Okay,
So your general point is that we're not going up enough, and it's well taken. You're not going up enough because we're not extending the useful life long enough for the money we have available.
I think that's accurate, and also to see what, I have no idea what the state just passed in terms of funding for this community for the work beyond this phase for that project, the resiliency part. It just seems, as soon as we're done, in a few years, this group is gonna assemble again to do it again.
So the point being, the guidance to Blake is to look to, extend that useful life a bit more based on the money we have available.
No, the guidance to this group is for further discussion on that point.
Right.
Not guidance to Blake.
So I'm glad that you're raising those concerns. And it points out to me that I guess I didn't do as well as I could have in explaining like the strategy and the thought behind the elevations. And we can certainly modify them if need be. But the conversation that was had around, the working waterfront was that folks said even in those very severe storms today, that this zone gets overtopped, but it's not, making it such that the commercial fishing operations can't work. And, trying to fortify this forever, would mean going up an astronomical amount that the 2 million wouldn't cover. And so, holding back the ocean is a challenge. And so the thought was that instead of taking an approach where, um, you know, it's unfeasible, that we look at the real operations today and impacts from flooding. And folks said, if this overtops, that's acceptable. I mean, there are places where, there is overtopping in a very severe storm event in the winter that happens, every so often, but it's designed for that. And so what we had talked about investing in and what our engineer had advised is that it would be a good idea to harden the edge, a good idea to, increase the rigidity of the walls, and then program the space such that, it's able to withstand those events and move the utilities and things, the pump station like we talked about, like those types of things, modify those so that they're out of harm's way. But the approach isn't to just, raise every inch of land because it wouldn't be, sustainable or affordable to do that. And also it's not really necessary for the operations of the working waterfront as we understand it. I mean, is that helpful or just wondering if that helps to sort of clarify sort of what the approach was. I mean, the approach for resilience would be incremental, right? So this is the first like near-term actions would be what we've just discussed. And then over time, additional actions could happen, but we don't foresee that, like, in 20 years, this is all ruined. What we're basing, the recommendations on are what we're seeing in the projections for 2030, 2050, and 2100.
And I think with raising the boat club, as much as is being proposed, that is a longer term solution, because we don't need to do that twice or 3 times, right? That was, how many feet did we say going up? 6.
Yeah,
So
that's right. So anytime you're investing in like elevating the building, or in the case of the harbor master's office, moving or rebuilding, then you're so right. Like you would never want to do that with a short-term time frame in mind. Like if you're gonna move it, like move it. And up by that chessboard is, that's high enough for all these projections we're talking about, and then some.
But it's a fair point, in terms of making sure that we don't ignore the inevitability.
And what the working waterfront needs.
Yeah, and
And
what-
to blend those two into this
right.
$2 million grant that's sitting out there.
Yeah.
And we don't provide enough resiliency for you.
Agreed.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm comfortable with the idea of I think it's wet floodproofing, the idea that it's under sometimes and we make it so they can withstand that.
And as
Looking
long
into
as-
building some kind of wharf, I think would be a
I
great
think
use
it's,
of
yeah,
that as well.
Yeah, my feeling about the 2 million is the more can be spent on the long lasting infrastructure rather than, stuff that ought to be in the annual
Capital
budgets,
plans, yeah.
the better. Yeah, so dirt and rocks and,
Yeah, the actual
yeah.
part.
Any other thoughts?
Well, this may not be the right forum to talk about the $2 million grant, but I guess I'd like to hear more about time frame and what it's for.
Is there anything else we need to hold Blake for? Maybe we can let him go and then we can keep talking.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Blake, anything else from us?
I mean, I guess just to close the loop, you said that most folks were nodding, so hopefully that was nodding in agreement that we're on the right track. But if it was the other kind of nodding, like this is not right, then that would be good to know.
It was a thumbs up nodding, I think.
Good nod.
All right. Okay. Well, you know how to contact us. So I'll keep cooking away at a lot of the things that were mentioned today. But if folks have other thoughts, then please don't hesitate to reach out. And we'll of course circulate the materials before the next meeting. Orion, I'll get you the flyer for the public outreach tomorrow, so that we can get that noticed, and hopefully we have a good turnout. But yeah, just wanted to thank everybody for helping us along the way. And I'll see you in the next one.
Congratulations.
Looks
Yeah.
good, thank you.
Thanks, Blake.
Thanks.
Like,
Bye.
See ya.
Thanks.